The morning frost clung to the windows of the old barn like desperate fingers, unwilling to let go even as the Colorado sun began its slow climb over the mountains. Jacob Reed stood in the doorway of the structure he'd inherited from his uncle, a man he'd barely known, and wondered why the old fool had left him this rotting piece of nothing instead of the prosperous ranch that went to his cousins. The lawyer's words still rang in his ears from 3 days ago. Your Uncle Benjamin specified that you, and only you, should receive the old barn on the eastern edge of the property. Everything inside it is yours. Jacob had driven the 200 miles from Wyoming, expecting perhaps some hidden fortune, maybe gold, or at least something worth selling. Instead, he'd found exactly what he'd expected. A derelict building that should have been torn down a decade ago. He was 34 years old, and he had nothing to show for his life except calloused hands and a reputation for being the man you hired when you needed someone who didn't talk much and worked harder than 3 men combined. He'd spent the last 5 years drifting from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to put down roots, never letting anyone get close enough to see the scars that ran deeper than skin. The war had done that to him. 4 years of hell, watching good men die, coming home to find his young wife had left him for a shopkeeper, taking their infant daughter with her. He tried to find them, but Mary had disappeared like smoke, and after a while, Jacob had stopped looking. What kind of father was he anyway? The kind who woke up screaming in the night. The kind who couldn't hold a conversation without his hands shaking. Better to be alone. He pushed open the barn door, the hinges screaming in protest. Dust motes danced in the shaft of morning light that followed him inside. The place smelled of old hay and mouse droppings and something else. Something that made him pause. Lavender. Jacob frowned, moving deeper into the barn. The scent grew stronger. And that's when he heard it. A soft whimper, barely audible, coming from one of the old horse stalls. His hand went instinctively to the gun at his hip as he approached slowly. Mountain lions sometimes denned in old buildings. He'd once found a bear in a similar structure. But when he looked over the stall door, his breath caught in his throat. A woman lay on a pile of old blankets, her face pale as death, her dark hair matted with sweat. She was young, maybe 21 or 22, and obviously very sick. Beside her, so small he almost missed her in the shadows, was a little girl. The child couldn't have been more than 4 years old, with blonde curls and eyes that were far too old for her young face. The little girl looked up at him without fear, her small hand resting protectively on the woman's shoulder. "Mama's sick," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. "She can't wake up right now." Jacob stood frozen, his mind racing. He should leave. He should walk away right now. He didn't get involved with people anymore. He didn't help. He didn't care. But those eyes, the little girl's eyes, were the same shade of blue his daughter's had been. He found himself climbing over the stall door before his mind had fully processed the decision. "How long has your mama been like this?" he asked, kneeling beside the woman. Her forehead was burning to the touch. 2 days. The child said. "Maybe 3. I don't know how to count that high yet. What's your name?" "Sarah. My mama is Ruth. Ruth Carpenter." Jacob touched the woman's face gently, turning it toward the light. She was beautiful even in her sickness, with fine features and skin that had once been creamy white, but now carried the pallor of fever. Her dress was torn and dirty, patched in several places. They were clearly running from something. "Sarah, I need to take your mama to a doctor. Can you be brave and come with us?" The little girl nodded solemnly. "I'm always brave. Mama says I'm the bravest girl she knows." Jacob carefully lifted Ruth into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, just skin and bones under the thin fabric of her dress. She moaned softly, but didn't wake, lost in whatever fevered dreams held her. "Stay close to me," he told Sarah, and the child immediately grabbed onto his coat with one small hand, her other arm wrapped around a cloth doll that had seen better days. The nearest doctor was in Cedar Creek, 10 miles away. Jacob loaded the woman into his wagon, creating a nest of blankets in the back, and lifted Sarah up beside her. "Hold your mama's hand," he told the child. "Talk to her. Tell her she's going to be all right." As he drove, Jacob found himself glancing back. Every few minutes to check on his passengers, Sarah sat perfectly still, one hand holding her mother's, the other clutching her doll. She sang softly, a lullaby he didn't recognize, her small voice carrying over the sound of the horses' hooves. Dr. Morrison's house sat on the edge of town, a neat white structure with green shutters. Jacob barely remembered pulling the horses to a stop before he was lifting Ruth again, carrying her toward the door. The doctor, a grey-haired man with kind eyes, took one look at his burden and ushered them inside immediately. "Pneumonia, if I'm not mistaken," he said, examining Ruth with practiced efficiency. "Bad case of it too. How long has she been sick?" "The child says 2 or 3 days. Dr. Morrison shook his head. "She should have had treatment days ago. This is serious, Mr. Reed. Jacob Reed. Is this your wife, Mr. Reed?" "No. I found her in my barn. Her and the child." The doctor's eyebrows rose, but he didn't comment further. "I'll need to keep her here for at least a week, possibly 2. The fever needs to break, and I'll need to watch for complications. Do you have funds to cover her care?" Jacob hesitated only a moment before nodding. His savings weren't much, but he had enough to cover a doctor's fees. He could always find more work. "What about the child?" Dr. Morrison asked, glancing at Sarah, who stood in the corner, her eyes wide and frightened. "She'll stay with me," Jacob heard himself say. "You? A stranger? That's highly irregular. You have a better suggestion, Doc? An orphanage? Because that's where she'll end up if I don't take her." Dr. Morrison studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "I suppose you're right, but I'll be checking in, Mr. Reed. If I find that child is being mistreated in any way, she won't be." Jacob turned to Sarah. "Your mama is going to stay here with the doctor for a little while. He's going to make her better. Would you like to come stay with me until she's well?" Sarah looked from him to her mother and back again. "Will you bring me to see her every day?" The child nodded slowly. "Okay, but I need to tell Mama goodbye first." Dr. Morrison allowed Sarah to approach the bed where Ruth lay, still unconscious. The little girl leaned close, whispering something Jacob couldn't hear, then kissed her mother's cheek. "I'm ready now," she said, taking Jacob's hand with surprising trust. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of Jacob's life. He'd rented a room at the boarding house in town, a simple space with one bed. Sarah slept curled up on a pallet he'd made on the floor, though she often woke crying in the night, calling for her mother. The first time it happened, Jacob had lain frozen in the dark, unsure what to do. But when her cries grew more desperate, he'd lifted her onto the bed beside him, letting her small body curl against his chest while he awkwardly patted her back. "Hush now," he'd murmured. "Your mama's all right. Dr. Morrison is taking good care of her." "I miss her," Sarah had sobbed. "I miss her so much." "I know, little one, I know." It had been the first time in 5 years that Jacob had held a child, and something in his chest cracked open, just a little. Every morning they visited Ruth. Sometimes she was awake, though weak and disoriented. Sarah would climb onto the bed, chattering about her day, telling her mother about the nice lady at the general store who'd given her a peppermint stick, about the cat she'd seen in the alley, about everything and nothing. Ruth's eyes would find Jacob during these visits, filled with questions and something else. Fear, maybe, or wariness. She never spoke to him, just listened to her daughter, and occasionally managed a weak smile. Dr. Morrison pulled Jacob aside on the 10th day. "She's improving. The fever broke last night. She should make a full recovery, though she'll be weak for a while." Relief flooded through Jacob, surprising him with its intensity. "There's something else," the doctor continued. "She's been asking about Sarah, wants to know if the child is being well cared for. I assured her you've been exemplary, but I think she needs to hear it from you." Jacob nodded and entered the sick room. Ruth was sitting up for the first time, propped against pillows, her dark hair brushed and braided by the doctor's wife. She was even more beautiful awake, though the illness had left her gaunt and fragile-looking. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice still raspy. "The doctor says you've been caring for my Sarah." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Why? Why would a stranger take in a child? What do you want from us?" Jacob understood then. She thought he was like so many men on the frontier, men who saw a vulnerable woman and child as opportunities to exploit. "Nothing, ma'am. I found you in my barn, sick and alone with a child. I did what anyone with a shred of decency would do." "Not anyone," Ruth said softly. "Most men would have left us there. Or worse." "I'm not most men." "No," she agreed, studying him with those intelligent dark eyes. "I can see that. Sarah talks about you constantly. Says you're teaching her to whistle and that you bought her new shoes because her old ones had holes." Jacob shrugged. "The child needed shoes." "Why were we in your barn, Mr. Reed? Did you put us there?" "No, ma'am. My uncle left me that barn when he died. I only found you when I came to see what he'd left me. Do you mind telling me how you came to be there?" Ruth looked away, her hands twisting in the blanket. "My husband died 4 months ago. Cholera. We had a small farm in Kansas, but when he died, his brother claimed it. Said a woman had no right to property, and that I should be grateful he was willing to let me stay on as a housekeeper." Her voice hardened. "I refused. He became insistent, said he'd take care of Sarah and me if I'd just be reasonable. I knew what he meant. So Sarah and I left in the middle of the night with what we could carry. We've been traveling west for 3 months, working when we could, sleeping in abandoned buildings when we couldn't afford a room." "How did you get sick?" "There was a storm about a week ago. We got caught in it, had no shelter. By the time we found your barn, I was already feeling poorly. I thought if I could just rest for a day, I'd be fine. I didn't mean to trespass." "You weren't trespassing. The barn was abandoned." "Still, we took advantage of your property. Mrs. Carpenter, you did what you had to do to protect your child. There's no shame in that." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "I failed her. She had to watch me get sicker and sicker, had to be alone in that barn, probably thinking I was dying. But you didn't die. And your daughter is fine, brave as they come. She had to be. I made sure of that." Jacob pulled up a chair, sitting beside the bed. "What will you do when you're well?" "I don't know. Keep moving, I suppose. Try to find work somewhere. Sarah's still young enough that I can keep her with me while I work, but in a few years," she trailed off, the worry evident in her face. "There might be another option." Ruth looked at him warily. "What kind of option?" "My uncle's will specified that the barn and 5 acres around it belong to me. It's not much, but there's a creek running through the property. With some work, it could be made livable. You and Sarah could stay there." "Why would you offer us that?" "Because you need somewhere safe, and I have the means to provide it." "What would you want in return?" Her voice was sharp, defensive. "Nothing. I'd ask nothing in return. Men don't give things away for nothing, Mr. Reed. What would you really want?" Jacob met her gaze steadily. "I want to know that when I leave Cedar Creek, I'm not leaving a woman and child to starve or worse. That's all. When you leave, you're not staying?" "I never stay anywhere long." "Why not?" The question was too personal, and Jacob rose from the chair. "That's not something I care to discuss, Mom. You think on my offer. If you want it, the place is yours. If not, I'll leave you money enough to get settled somewhere else." He was at the door when her voice stopped him. "Mr. Reed, thank you for everything." He nodded without turning around and left. 3 days later, Ruth was released from the doctor's care. She was still weak, her steps uncertain, but Dr. Morrison declared her well enough to leave his house as long as she rested and didn't overexert herself. Jacob brought the wagon around, helping her climb up to the seat. Sarah bounced with excitement in the back, chattering about how they were going to live in a barn. "It's not a barn anymore," Jacob said. "Well, it is, but I've been working on it." He'd spent every evening for the past week at the property, cleaning out the old structure, repairing the worst of the holes in the walls, installing a wood stove he'd bought from the general store. It wasn't much, but it was better than how he'd found it. When they arrived, Ruth's hand flew to her mouth. The barn had been transformed. The doors had been rehung properly, the windows cleaned and fitted with real glass. Inside, Jacob had created a small living space using old lumber and determination. There was a sleeping area, curtained off for privacy, a table and 2 chairs, and the wood stove, its pipe running up through a carefully sealed hole in the roof. "It's not a house," Jacob said gruffly, "but it's warm and dry. I brought in supplies, food, blankets, lamp oil. Should last you a month at least." Ruth walked slowly through the space, touching the curtain, the table, the neatly stacked firewood beside the stove. When she turned to face him, tears were streaming down her face. "This is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me," she whispered. Jacob shifted uncomfortably. "Like I said, it's not much. It's everything." Sarah ran to hug his legs, nearly knocking him over. "Thank you, Mr. Jacob. Thank you, thank you, thank you." He awkwardly patted her head, unused to such open affection. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "This is the deed to the property. I had the lawyer draw it up. The land and barn are yours now, Mrs. Carpenter. Legal and improper." Ruth's face went white. "You can't. This is too much. I can't accept this." "You can, and you will. I have no use for 5 acres in Colorado. I was planning to sell it anyway. This way, I know it's going to someone who needs it." "Why are you really doing this?" Ruth asked, her voice breaking. "Please just tell me the truth." Jacob looked at her, at this brave woman who'd walked hundreds of miles to protect her child, who'd nearly died in his barn, who stood before him now with tears on her face and gratitude in her eyes. "Because 5 years ago I lost my daughter," he said quietly. "Her mother took her, and I never found them. I think about her every day. Wonder if she's safe, if she's happy, if she even remembers me. Helping you and Sarah, it's the closest I can. And come to helping her." Ruth stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be. Just take care of your little girl. That's all I ask." "Where will you go?" "North. There's a ranch in Montana looking for a foreman. I've got the job if I want it." "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow." "So soon. No point in staying." That night, Ruth insisted he stay for dinner. She'd made stew from the supplies he'd brought, and they sat around the small table, Sarah chattering away about the chickens she wanted to get and the garden she'd plant in the spring. After the child was put to bed behind the curtain, Ruth and Jacob sat in the lamplight, the silence between them comfortable for the first time. "Can I ask you something?" Ruth said. "I suppose. What happened to you in the war? You have the look of a man who's seen things he wishes he could forget." Jacob stared into his coffee cup. "I was at Gettysburg. 3 days of hell. Lost most of my company. When I came home, I wasn't the same man my wife married. She said I scared her. Said she couldn't raise a child around someone who woke up screaming every night. I don't blame her for leaving." "I do," Ruth said fiercely. "A wife stands by her husband, especially when he's suffering. She should have helped you heal, not abandoned you. Maybe I was beyond healing." "No one is beyond healing, Mr. Reed. Some wounds just take longer to close." "You sound like you know something about that." "My husband wasn't a kind man," Ruth admitted. "Oh, he never hit me, but words can wound just as deep as fists. He made me feel small and stupid and worthless. When he died, I mourned, but I also felt free. Is that terrible?" "No, that's honest. I promised myself I'd never let another man make me feel that way again. I'd rather be alone forever than give up the freedom I have now." "That's a lonely life," says the man who never stays in one place. Jacob smiled despite himself. "Point taken. What if you stayed here?" Ruth asked suddenly. "What if you didn't go to Montana?" "Why would I do that?" "Because," she paused, gathering her courage, "because I think we could help each other. I need someone to help build this place into a real home, to teach me how to survive out here, and you need to stop running from your ghosts." "Mrs. Carpenter." "Ruth. Call me Ruth." "Ruth, you don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to stay, to give yourself a chance at something more than drifting from place to place alone. I'm not husband material. I'm broken in ways you can't see. I don't want a husband. I want a partner, someone who'll work beside me to build something good here, someone who'll be kind to my daughter and fair to me. That's all." Jacob stood, pacing the small space. "You're offering charity, pity for the broken soldier." Ruth rose too, moving to stand in front of him. She was so much smaller than he was, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder, but there was steel in her spine as she looked up at him. "I'm offering you the same thing you offered me, a chance, a place to belong. And if I wake you up screaming in the middle of the night, then I'll make you tea and sit with you until the nightmares fade. And if I'm not fit company for days at a time, then I'll leave you alone until you are." "Why?" The question came out harsh, almost desperate. "Why would you want me here?" Ruth reached up, her hand cupping his bearded cheek with infinite gentleness. "Because when you look at my daughter, I see the father you must have been. Because when you helped me, you asked nothing in return. Because I think under all that armor you wear, there's a good man who deserves a second chance." Jacob caught her hand, holding it against his face. Her palm was soft and warm, and something in his chest that had been frozen for 5 years began to thaw. "I can't promise I'll be easy to live with. I can't promise I will be either, but we could try. We could just try." "What about Sarah? She needs stability, not a man who might leave. Sarah needs to see her mother happy. She needs to learn that men can be kind. She needs a safe place to grow up. You can give her all of that." Jacob closed his eyes, warring with himself. Every instinct told him to run, to leave before he could disappoint them both. But something stronger, something he'd thought dead, whispered that maybe Ruth was right. Maybe he deserved a second chance. "I'll stay through the winter," he said finally. "Help you get established. Come spring, we'll see where we stand." Ruth's smile could have lit up the darkest night. Through the winter. That's a start. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Jacob threw himself into the work of transforming the barn and land into a proper homestead. He built a chicken coop and bought a dozen hens. He reinforced the barn walls and added a proper sleeping loft for himself, giving Ruth and Sarah the privacy of the lower level. He planted a winter garden of hardy vegetables and cut firewood until they had enough to last through the coldest months. Every evening, he'd return to find Ruth cooking dinner, Sarah practicing her letters at the table, and something in him settled in a way it never had before. Ruth was true to her word. When he woke screaming from nightmares of the war, she'd appear with tea and sit quietly nearby until his hands stopped shaking. She never asked what he dreamed, never pushed him to talk. She was just there, and slowly, very slowly, Jacob began to heal. He taught Sarah to ride the old horse he'd bought, laughing at her fearless determination to gallop before she could even trot properly. He showed her how to gather eggs without scaring the hens and how to whistle with 2 fingers in her mouth. With Ruth, things were more complicated. They worked side by side during the day, their conversations easy and comfortable. But at night, when the lamps were lit and Sarah was asleep, there was a tension between them that had nothing to do with fear or mistrust. Jacob found himself noticing things he shouldn't. The way Ruth's hair caught the lamplight, the graceful movement of her hands as she sewed, the soft sound of her humming while she worked, the rare smile that transformed her entire face. He caught her watching him too. Her eyes would follow him as he split wood, her gaze lingering on his hands when he helped her with some task. Sometimes their fingers would brush as they passed something between them, and the contact sent sparks up his arm. One night in December, a storm hit that buried the barn in snow. Jacob had been outside checking on the animals when it started, and by the time he made it back inside, he was half frozen and soaked through. Ruth took one look at him and ordered him out of his wet clothes with the brisk authority of a woman who wouldn't be argued with. She hung a blanket between them while he stripped down to his long underwear, then made him sit by the stove, wrapped in dry blankets, while she heated water for tea. "You could have died out there," she scolded, though her hands were gentle as she pressed the hot cup into his cold fingers. "I've survived worse. That doesn't mean you should be careless with your life. Why do you care?" The question came out before he could stop it. Ruth paused, then sat down beside him on the bench. "Because your life matters to me," she said simply. "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being the stranger who saved us and became someone I care about." "Ruth, let me finish. I know we agreed on nothing beyond partnership. I know you're planning to leave in the spring, but I need you to know that if you wanted to stay, if you wanted more than just this arrangement we have, I would welcome it." Jacob set down his tea, his hands still shaking from the cold, or maybe not from the cold. "I'm not good for you. I'm damaged goods, Ruth. So am I. We're both scarred and broken in our own ways, but maybe that's why we fit together. I'm 14 years older than you. I don't care. I might never be free of the nightmares. I'll be there for every single one. I can't give you the life you deserve. You already have." She took his face in both her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You gave me safety when I had none. You gave my daughter a home. You work yourself to exhaustion every day to make sure we have everything we need. You're gentle and kind and patient. What more could I possibly want?" "Love," Jacob said roughly. "You deserve love, Ruth, and love me," she whispered. "Let yourself love me, because God help me, I've already fallen in love with you." The words hit him like a physical blow. "You can't. You don't know me well enough to... I know you wake up screaming from nightmares but never complain. I know you save the best pieces of meat for Sarah and me. I know you sing while you work when you think no one can hear. I know you cry sometimes when you're carving wood in the evening, and I think you're remembering your daughter. I know you're the best man I've ever met, Jacob Reed. And I know I love you." Jacob pulled her into his arms without conscious thought, burying his face in her hair. She smelled of soap and cooking, and something uniquely her, and it made his head spin. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be what you need. Just be yourself. That's all I'm asking. I'm afraid I'll fail." "You fail, Sarah? We all fail sometimes. That's being human." Jacob pulled back enough to look at her, this brave woman who'd walked into his life and turned everything upside down. Her eyes were shining with unshed tears, her face tilted up toward his. "I think I've loved you since the day you called me out for trying to give you charity," he said roughly. "You were so fierce, so determined not to be a victim. I'd never met anyone like you." "Then stay," Stay and build a life with us. Let yourself be happy, Jacob. He kissed her then, his lips finding hers with a hunger that surprised them both. She melted against him, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for the first time in 5 years, Jacob felt whole. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ruth laughed softly. "What?" Jacob asked. "I was just thinking how scandalous this would be if anyone knew. A widow and a bachelor living under the same roof." "Then marry me," Jacob heard himself say. "Marry me and make it right." Ruth's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. But I also know I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to raise Sarah as my own. I want to build this place into a real home, a real family." "Yes," Ruth breathed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." They were married a week later by the circuit preacher who rode through Cedar Creek. Sarah stood beside them, beaming with pride in her new dress that Ruth had sewn. The ceremony was simple, held in the barn they'd transformed together, witnessed by Dr. Morrison and his wife, and a handful of neighbors who'd become friends over the past months. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Jacob kissed his bride with all the pent-up emotion he'd been holding back, and Sarah cheered. That night, after Sarah was tucked into bed in the sleeping loft Jacob had built for her, he and Ruth finally had the privacy they'd been craving. Jacob was nervous, his hands shaking as he helped Ruth out of her dress, terrified he'd do something wrong. "I haven't been with anyone since before the war," he admitted. "And I've only been with one man, and he wasn't gentle or patient. We'll figure it out together." They did, slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies in the lamplight. Jacob had forgotten how soft a woman's skin could be, how sweet her sighs, how incredible it felt to be joined with someone you loved. Ruth responded to his touch with a passion that surprised them both, her hands exploring his scarred chest without flinching, her lips finding every hurt and healing it with kisses. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Ruth's head on Jacob's chest, his arms wrapped around her. "I never thought I could feel this happy again," he murmured into her hair. "Neither did I. I thought happiness was something other people had. We're going to build something good here, Ruth. I promise you that. We already have." The winter months passed in a blur of work and laughter, and learning to be a family. Jacob taught Sarah to ice skate on the frozen creek and told her stories about his childhood in Missouri. Ruth taught him to read better, patiently helping him through the books she'd treasured since childhood. They made plans for the spring. They'd expand the garden, maybe get a milk cow, definitely add more chickens. Jacob wanted to build a proper house eventually, something with separate bedrooms and a real kitchen. The nightmares came less frequently now. When they did, Ruth would wake him with gentle hands and soft words, and he'd fall back asleep with her in his arms, the darkness held at bay by her presence. In February, Ruth told him she was pregnant. Jacob had been replacing a fence post when she came out to tell him, and he'd dropped his hammer in shock. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. The baby should come." In September, he'd picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, until she'd begged him to put her down before she got dizzy. That night, lying in bed with his hand on her still flat stomach, Jacob felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. "What should we name the baby?" Ruth asked sleepily. "If it's a boy, I was thinking maybe Benjamin, after my uncle, the one who left you the barn." "Yeah, if he hadn't done that, I never would have found you. Seems like we should honor that somehow." "And if it's a girl?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "What would you think about Emma?" "That was my daughter's name." Ruth's hand covered his on her stomach. "I think that would be perfect. A way to honor the child you lost and celebrate the child we're gaining." "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Jacob Reed, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal the first green shoots of new growth. Jacob plowed the garden, while Ruth and Sarah planted seeds, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. One afternoon in late March, a visitor arrived. Jacob was in the barn, repairing tack, when he heard the sound of a horse approaching. He stepped outside to find a well-dressed man on a fine bay mare, looking around with obvious disdain. "Can I help you?" Jacob asked. "I'm looking for Ruth Carpenter. I was told she might be here." Every protective instinct Jacob had roared to life. Who's asking? Thomas Carpenter. I'm her brother-in-law, the man who'd driven Ruth from her home. Jacob's hands curled into fists. She doesn't want to see you. That's for her to decide, not you. Now fetch her. I don't fetch for anyone, Carpenter. And you're not welcome here. I have every right to see my brother's widow. Your brother's widow is my wife now, and you lost any rights you might have had when you drove her out of her home. Thomas Carpenter's face turned red. She told you that lie? I offered her a respectable position and she threw it in my face. I know exactly what you offered and it wasn't respectable. Ruth appeared in the doorway of the barn, Sarah clutching her skirts. What are you doing here, Thomas? I've come to bring you home. You've had your little adventure. It's time to come back where you belong. I am home. This is where I belong. Living in a barn with some drifter. That's not a life for you or Sarah. Jacob stepped forward, placing himself between Thomas and his family. That's enough. You need to leave. Or what, you'll make me? I have the law on my side. Ruth is still my responsibility according to my brother's will. Actually, Ruth said, pulling a paper from her apron pocket, I'm not. This is my marriage certificate. I'm Jacob Reed's wife now, which means I'm no longer your concern in any way. Thomas snatched the paper, reading it with growing fury. You married him? This nobody? I married a good man who treats me with respect and kindness, something you could never understand. You'll regret. And this, when he leaves you like all drifters do, you'll come crawling back, and I won't be so generous. I'm never leaving, Jacob said quietly, the words carrying absolute certainty. This is my home. Ruth is my wife. Sarah is my daughter. And come September, we'll have another child. That's my family, Carpenter, and I protect what's mine. Thomas looked between them, seeing perhaps for the first time that he'd truly lost. You'll fail. This whole foolish venture will fail, and you'll have nothing. We already have everything, Ruth said, taking Jacob's hand. We have each other. Now please, leave our property. They watched Thomas ride away, his back stiff with anger. When he was out of sight, Sarah tugged on Jacob's sleeve. Are you really my papa now? Jacob knelt down so he was at her level. If you want me to be, I do. I want it more than anything. He pulled her into a hug, this brave little girl who'd stolen his heart from the first moment he saw her. Then I'm your papa, and I promise I'll always be here for you, even when I'm grown up, even when you're grown up. That night, after Sarah was asleep, Jacob and Ruth sat outside watching the stars. The air was warm for early spring, carrying the scent of wet earth and new growth. Do you ever think about your first daughter? Ruth asked softly. Every day. I wonder where she is, if she's happy, if she remembers me at all. I think she does. Somewhere deep down, I think she remembers that she had a father who loved her. I hope so. I hope wherever she is, she knows I never stopped loving her. Ruth leaned her head on his shoulder. You're a good father, Jacob. Sarah adores you. She's easy to love. So are you. Jacob turned to kiss her temple. How did I get so lucky? It wasn't luck. It was an old barn and a stubborn woman who refused to let you hide from life anymore. Best inheritance I ever received. I thought you were angry when you found out your uncle left you. The barn instead of the ranch. I was. I thought he was punishing me for staying away, but now I understand. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was giving me the one thing I needed most. An old building that needed repair? No. He was giving me a second chance. He was putting me exactly where I needed to be, to find you and Sarah. That barn was never about the building. It was about what was inside it. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. That's a beautiful way to look at it. It's the truth. Everything I have, everything I am now, started the moment I opened that barn door and found you, and found a family, Jacob agreed. The summer passed in a golden haze of hard work and happiness. Jacob built a proper house, a small but solid structure with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that made Ruth cry when she first saw it. They moved in just before the baby was due, and Ruth spent her final weeks of pregnancy arranging their few possessions, making the space into a real home. Sarah started school in town, riding in with Jacob on the mornings he had business there, and coming home full of stories about her friends and her lessons. She was thriving, the scared little girl Jacob had found in the barn, replaced by a confident child who knew she was loved. In September, on a warm evening when the crickets sang in the grass, Ruth went into labor. Dr. Morrison had ridden out at the first sign, and now he supervised while Jacob paced outside, too nervous to sit still. Sarah sat on the porch steps, her doll in her lap. "Is Mama going to be okay?" "Your Mama is strong. She'll be fine." "Are you scared?" Jacob sat down beside his daughter. "Terrified." "Me too. But we'll be brave together, right?" "Right." The sound of a baby's cry made them both jump to their feet. Dr. Morrison appeared in the doorway, grinning. "Congratulations, Mr. Reed. You have a healthy baby girl." Jacob rushed inside to find Ruth propped up in bed, exhausted, but beaming, a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with so much love, it made his chest ache. "Come meet your daughter." He approached slowly, almost afraid to look. But when Ruth pulled back the blanket, revealing a tiny face with dark hair and eyes that were already trying to focus, something in Jacob's heart that had been broken for 5 years finally mended completely. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Do you want to hold her?" With trembling hands, Jacob took his daughter, cradling her against his chest. She was so small, so fragile. But when she wrapped one tiny fist around his finger, he knew he'd do anything to protect her. "Hello, Emma," he murmured. "I'm your papa. I've been waiting for you." Sarah climbed onto the bed beside Ruth, looking at her baby sister with wonder. "She's so little." "You were this little once," Ruth said, pulling Sarah close. "Look at us. We're a real family now." Jacob looked at his wife, his daughters, the home they'd built together, and felt a peace he'd never thought possible. "When I found you in that barn," he said to Ruth, "I thought I was saving you, but you were the one who saved me. We saved each other." That night, after Dr. Morrison had left and the girls were sleeping, Jacob sat in the rocking chair by the window, his newborn daughter in his arms. Ruth watched from the bed, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but bright with happiness. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how I almost didn't come to Colorado, how I almost sold the barn site unseen, how close I came to missing all of this. But you didn't. You came, you opened that door, and found everything I never knew I needed." The baby stirred in his arms, making small sounds. Jacob rocked her gently, humming the lullaby he remembered from his first daughter. He hoped, wherever Emma the First was, that she was safe and loved. But he also knew that he'd been given a gift, a second chance to be the father he'd always wanted to be. "I love you," he told Ruth. "I don't say it enough, but I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. I love you too, you and our girls. This life we've built, it's not what I expected. Is it better or worse?" Jacob looked at the baby in his arms, at his wife in their bed, thought about Sarah sleeping peacefully in the next room, outside the land he'd thought worthless, stretched out under the stars, their home standing solid and true. "It's better than anything I could have imagined. I came looking for an inheritance and found a family instead. The best things in life are the ones we don't see coming, like a sick woman and a little girl in an old barn." Exactly like that. Emma began to fuss, and Jacob rose to bring her to Ruth for feeding. He helped settle them both comfortably, then sat on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on Ruth's leg. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for seeing past all my rough edges, for giving me this. You gave it to yourself, Jacob. You just needed someone to show you it was possible." As he watched his wife nurse their daughter, Jacob thought about the journey that had brought him here, the war, the loss, the years of drifting, the uncle who'd left him a barn that seemed like nothing but turned out to be everything. He'd gone looking for an inheritance of wood and nails, maybe a piece of property he could sell for a few dollars. Instead, he'd found Ruth's fierce courage, Sarah's unconditional trust, and now Emma's perfect innocence. He'd found a home, a purpose, a reason to wake up each morning without the weight of the past crushing him. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were fewer now, softer. And when they did come, Ruth was there, and that made all the difference. "What are you smiling about?" Ruth asked. "Just thinking about how wrong I was about that barn. I thought it was the worst inheritance anyone had ever received. Turned out it was the best, because of what was inside." "Because of what was inside," Jacob confirmed. "My uncle couldn't have left me anything more valuable if he'd tried." "Do you think he knew about you and Sarah?" "No, but I think he knew I needed something to make me stop running, and he gave me exactly what I needed." The baby finished nursing, and Ruth handed her back to Jacob for burping. He lifted the tiny girl to his shoulder, patting her back gently, marveling at how natural this felt. "I was thinking," Ruth said. Maybe we should write it down, our story, for the girls when they're older. What would we say? The truth, that sometimes the best things come from the places we least expect. That home isn't a place, but the people who love you. That second chances are real, if you're brave enough to take them. And that abandoned barns sometimes hold treasures worth more than gold. Ruth laughed softly. Exactly. Sarah appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. I heard the baby. Can I see her again? Jacob made room on the bed and Sarah climbed up carefully. He showed her how to support Emma's head, how to be gentle, and watched as his older daughter looked at her little sister with pure love. I'm going to protect her always, Sarah declared. Just like you protected us, Papa. The words still made Jacob's throat tight with emotion. That's what families do. We protect each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Sarah looked up at him, her blue eyes serious. I'm glad that barn was yours. I'm glad you found us. So am I, sweetheart. So am I. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Jacob looked around at his family. Ruth, brave and beautiful, and his. Sarah, no longer afraid, blooming with confidence and love. Emma, brand new to the world, with her whole life ahead of her. This was his inheritance. Not wooden nails and 5 acres of Colorado dirt, though those things had their value. His real inheritance was this, the chance to love and be loved in return. The opportunity to be a husband, a father, a man with purpose and hope. He'd walked into that barn expecting nothing and found everything. The weeks after Emma's birth brought a new rhythm to their lives. Jacob found himself waking early, not from nightmares anymore, but to help Ruth with the baby. He'd cradle Emma in his strong arms, while Ruth caught a few precious hours of sleep, singing softly to his daughter as the sun rose over the mountains. You have a beautiful voice, Ruth told him one morning, catching him mid-lullaby. I never knew you could sing like that. Jacob felt his cheeks warm. My mother used to sing to me. I thought I'd forgotten, but it all came back when I held Emma. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become, the father you are. I hope so. I spent so many years thinking I didn't deserve another chance at this. Ruth crossed the room, still moving a bit slowly from childbirth, and wrapped her arms around him from behind. You deserve every bit of happiness you have, Jacob Reed, and I'm going to remind you of that every single day for the rest of our lives. He turned in her embrace, careful not to jostle the baby, and kissed her softly. How did I get so lucky? We both got lucky, or maybe it was fate. Your uncle leaving you that barn, us being there at exactly the right moment. Sometimes I think it was all meant to be. I don't believe in fate, Jacob said, but I believe in you. I believe in us. As October arrived, Jacob prepared for his first real test as a father to Sarah. The school in town was hosting a harvest festival, and Sarah had been practicing a poem for weeks to recite in front of all the parents and townspeople. Papa, what if I forget the words? She asked nervously the night before, her small hands twisting in her nightgown. Then you make up new words, Jacob said, sitting on the edge of her bed. Or you start over. Everyone forgets things sometimes, sweetheart. It's not about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to try. Were you ever scared when you were little? Jacob thought about that all the time. I was scared of the dark, scared of storms, scared of making mistakes. But you want to know a secret? Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. Being scared is okay. It means you care about something. The bravest people I ever knew were the ones who did things even though they were terrified. Like Mama walking all those miles to find somewhere safe. Exactly like that. Your Mama is one of the bravest people I know. And you know what? You're just like her. Sarah beamed at the comparison. Will you and Mama both be there tomorrow? Wild horses couldn't keep us away, though Emma might make some noise if she gets fussy. That's okay. Baby Emma can't help it. Sarah paused, then asked quietly, Papa, do you still think about your other daughter, the one from before? The question caught Jacob off guard, but he answered honestly, every day, sweetheart, but it doesn't make me love you any less. The heart has room for all kinds of love. I hope she's happy wherever she is. I hope she has someone who loves her like you love me. Jacob had to look away for a moment, his eyes stinging. That's a kind thing to say, Sarah. You have a good heart. Mama says I get it from you. Your mama gives me far too much credit. The harvest festival was a success. Sarah recited her poem flawlessly, her voice clear and confident, and when she was done, she looked straight at Jacob and Ruth and grinned. Jacob found himself applauding louder than anyone else, pride swelling in his chest. Afterward, several of the other fathers came over to shake his hand. "That's a fine daughter you have, Reed," said Samuel Watkins, who owned the livery stable. "You must be proud." "Prouder than I have words for," Jacob admitted. "We heard your wife just had a baby. How's she doing?" "Strong as ever. Ruth's tougher than most men I know." "That's high praise coming from a war veteran," Samuel said. "You settling in well out on that property?" "Better than I ever imagined. It's home now. You know, we could use a man like you on the town council. Someone who knows hard work and has good sense." "You interested?" Jacob was surprised by the offer. "I'm not much for politics." "It's not politics. It's just neighbors helping neighbors. We meet once a month, talk about what the town needs, road repairs, school funding, that sort of thing. Think about it." Later, as they rode home in the wagon, Ruth feeding Emma under a blanket while Sarah dozed against her shoulder, Jacob told his wife about the invitation. "You should do it," Ruth said immediately. "You'd be good at it. I don't know the first thing about running a town. Neither do most of them, probably, but you're fair and honest, and you care about doing right by people. That's more important than experience." "When did you get so wise?" "I married you, didn't I? That should tell you something about my judgment." Jacob laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. He laughed more these days, he realized. Ruth and the girls had brought joy back into his life, had taught him that happiness wasn't something to be feared or distrusted. Winter came early and hard that year. By November, they were snowed in for days at a time, the drifts piling up against the house until Jacob had to dig tunnels just to reach the barn and animals. But inside, the house was warm and full of life. Sarah practiced her letters by lamplight, while Ruth sewed tiny clothes for Emma. Jacob carved toys from scrap wood, his hands creating little horses and dolls and whistles that made Sarah squeal with delight. "Tell us a story, Papa," Sarah would beg on the longest, darkest nights, and Jacob, who'd spent 5 years barely speaking to anyone, found himself spinning tales of brave princesses and loyal horses, of adventures in far-off lands, and heroes who always came home to the people they loved. "Is that true?" Sarah would ask. "Did those things really happen?" "The best stories are the ones that are true in the ways that matter," Jacob would say, echoing something his own father had once told him. One particularly brutal storm hit in January, lasting 3 days. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow fell so thick they couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the windows. On the second day, Sarah woke up crying, frightened by the sounds of the storm. "What if it never stops?" she whispered, climbing into bed between Jacob and Ruth. "What if we're stuck here forever?" "Then we'd be stuck together," Jacob said, pulling her close. "And that wouldn't be so bad, would it?" "But what about the chickens and the horse?" "The animals are safe in the barn. I made sure they have plenty of food and water. They're probably warmer than we are right now." "I'm not warm enough," Sarah announced, and Jacob could hear the smile in her voice despite her fear. "Well, that's easily fixed." He pulled the blankets up higher and tucked them around her. "Now you're in a cocoon, perfectly safe and warm." "Tell me the story about the barn again," Sarah said, "about how you found us." Jacob glanced at Ruth over their daughter's head. His wife nodded encouragingly. "I've told you that story 100 times, but I like it. It's my favorite." So Jacob told her again about the cold morning he'd arrived to see his inheritance, about the lavender scent that led him deeper into the barn, about finding a sick woman and a brave little girl who weren't afraid of a stranger with a gun. "And I thought you were a bear at first," Sarah interjected, as she always did at this part. "A very handsome bear," Ruth added, making Sarah giggle. "A very grumpy bear," Jacob corrected. "I didn't want to help anyone. I just wanted to be left alone. But you helped anyway." Why? Jacob had answered this question before, but he knew Sarah needed to hear it again. "Because you reminded me that some things are more important than being afraid. Some things are worth taking a chance on. Like family." "Exactly like family." When the storm finally broke on the 4th day, the world was transformed. Snow lay pristine and sparkling in every direction, the sun so bright on it that it hurt to look. Jacob dug his way to the barn, relieved to find all the animals healthy and well. As he was heading back to the house, he heard it, a faint cry, almost lost in the wind. He stopped, Listening, there it was again. Following the sound, Jacob found a young coyote pup trapped in a snowdrift, its mother nowhere to be seen. The animal was half frozen and terrified, snapping weakly at Jacob's hands as he pulled it free. "Easy now," he murmured, tucking the shivering creature inside his coat. "You're all right. I've got you." Sarah's eyes went wide when he brought the pup inside. "Can we keep him?" "Absolutely not. Wild animals aren't pets, but he's so small, and he's all alone. His mother probably got separated from him in the storm. Once he's warm and fed, we'll see about reuniting them." But over the next few days, as Jacob cared for the injured pup, checking it for frostbite and feeding it warm milk with a cloth, he found himself growing attached. Despite his better judgment, "He trusts you," Ruth observed, watching Jacob gently examine the pup's paws. "I've never seen a wild animal so calm with a person. He knows I'm trying to help. Animals are smarter than people give them credit for. Are you going to be able to let him go?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "I have to. It's not right to keep him. He belongs out there with his own kind. But what if his mother doesn't come back? What if he can't survive on his own? Then I don't know. We'll figure it out when the time comes." In the end, they never had to make that choice. One evening, as Jacob set the pup outside the barn with some food, a larger coyote appeared at the edge of the tree line. The pup's ears perked up, and it let out a small yip of recognition. The mother coyote called back, and the pup bounded through the snow toward her, healthy and strong. Jacob watched them disappear into the forest, feeling both sad and satisfied. "You did a good thing," Ruth said, appearing beside him with Emma in her arms. "You saved that pup's life. Just returning a favor. Something saved me once. Seemed only right to pass it along." "What saved you?" Jacob looked at her, at the baby in her arms, at Sarah watching from the window, and smiled. "You did. All of you did." As winter gave way to spring, Jacob threw himself into expanding their homestead. He built a larger chicken coop and bought a milk cow from Samuel Watkins. He plowed more land for the garden and erected fences to keep out deer and rabbits. But his most ambitious project was the addition to the house. He wanted to give Sarah her own room, and eventually Emma would need her own space too. "Are you sure you can do this yourself?" Ruth asked, watching him sketch out plans on a piece of brown paper. "I built half of Fort Donelson during the war. I think I can manage a bedroom or two." "That's not what I meant. I meant, shouldn't you ask for help? The other men in town would probably—" "I can do it myself." Ruth was quiet for a moment, then said gently, "You don't have to do everything alone anymore, Jacob. That's what having a community means. People helping each other." He knew she was right, but old habits died hard. He'd spent so long relying only on himself that accepting help felt like admitting weakness. But the next Sunday, when Samuel and 3 other men from town showed up at his property with tools and lumber, Jacob realized he didn't have to say yes to their help. They were giving it anyway. "Heard you were building an addition," Samuel said, grinning. "Figured you could use some extra hands." "I don't need—" "Course you don't. You're Jacob Reed. You could probably build the whole thing blindfolded with one hand tied behind your back. But why should you when you've got neighbors willing to help?" And so Jacob learned another lesson, that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Working alongside the other men, Jacob found himself actually enjoying their company. They joked and told stories and taught him things about carpentry he hadn't known. And when the addition was complete 3 weeks later, sturdy and true, Jacob felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the physical structure. He'd built more than walls and a roof. He'd built connections, friendships, a place in this community. "Thank you," he told the men when they finished. "I know I didn't ask for your help, but I'm grateful for it." "That's what neighbors do," Samuel said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You'd do the same for us." "I would," Jacob realized. "I absolutely would." That night, Sarah explored her new bedroom with wonder, touching the walls, examining the window that looked out toward the mountains, jumping on the bed Jacob had built from cedar. "It's perfect, Papa. It's the most beautiful room in the whole world." "I'm glad you like it, sweetheart." "Will Emma get her own room too when she's bigger?" "She will. I'm planning to build another addition next year. Then we'll have the biggest house in the whole territory." Jacob laughed. "I don't know about that, but it'll be big enough for our family." "What if we get even bigger? What if Mama has another baby?" The thought made Jacob's heart skip. He and Ruth had talked about more children, but with Emma still so young, it had seemed like something for the distant future. "Then we'll build more rooms. As many as we need. I hope we do get bigger. I like being a big sister." As spring turned to summer, Life on the homestead settled into a comfortable pattern. Jacob worked the land, Ruth tended the house and children, and together they built something neither had thought possible when they first met, a real home, filled with love and laughter, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. One evening in June, Jacob was working in the garden when he heard hoofbeats approaching. He looked up to see a rider, a woman, coming fast down the road toward their property. Something about her was familiar, though Jacob couldn't place what. She was young, maybe 16 or 17, with blonde hair and blue eyes and a determined set to her jaw. When she pulled her horse to a stop in front of him, Jacob saw that she'd been crying. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked. The girl dismounted, looking at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Are you Jacob Reed?" "Jacob Reed from Missouri." "I am." "Do I know you?" "No, but I've been looking for you for 2 years." She took a deep breath. "My name is Emma Reed, and I think you're my father." Jacob felt the world tilt beneath his feet. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. And yet, looking at this girl, he saw echoes of the infant daughter he'd lost. The same blue eyes, the same stubborn chin. "Emma?" The name came out as barely a whisper. "My mother told me before she died that my real father was a soldier named Jacob Reed from Missouri. She said she left you because she was afraid, but that you'd loved me more than anything. I've been searching for you ever since." Jacob couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Emotions he'd buried for years came rushing back all at once. Grief, rage, hope, love, confusion. Ruth appeared in the doorway of the house, sensing something was wrong. "Jacob, what's happening?" "This girl..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Emma looked at Ruth, then back at Jacob. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I needed to know if you were real, if the stories my mother told me were true." "What did she tell you?" Jacob managed to ask. "That you were the bravest man she'd ever known, that you came home from the war different, haunted by what you'd seen, that she was young and scared and made a terrible mistake by leaving. She said she looked for you later, wanted to bring me back to you, but you'd disappeared. No one knew where. You'd gone. She died." Jacob's voice cracked. 6 months ago, fever, before she passed. She made me promise I'd try to find you, that I'd tell you she was sorry." Jacob sank down onto the porch steps, his legs unable to hold him anymore. Ruth hurried to his side, her hand on his shoulder, a silent support. "I have a daughter," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "All this time, I have a daughter." Emma approached slowly, cautiously, as if afraid he might vanish if she moved too quickly. "I know this is a shock. I didn't mean to just appear like this, but I didn't know how else to do it." "You found me," Jacob said, looking up at her. "After all these years, after all the places I've been, you found me. How?" "I hired a detective, spent every penny I had saved. He traced you through military records, then through employment records at different ranches. The last place you'd worked in Wyoming said you'd left to collect an inheritance in Colorado. It took me another 3 months to track you here." Jacob stood slowly, studying the girl before him. She was tall and strong-looking, dressed in practical traveling clothes, with dirt on her boots and determination in her eyes. She looked nothing like the baby he remembered, but everything like the person he would have wanted his daughter to become. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that I'm alive, that I'm okay, that my mother's last wish was for me to tell you she never stopped loving you, even though she left." "Where will you go now?" Ruth asked gently. Emma looked surprised by the question, as if she hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know. I have a little money left, enough to get back east, I suppose. I have an aunt in Pennsylvania who might take me in." "You'll stay here," Jacob heard himself say. "Tonight, at least. It's getting dark, and you've traveled far. Stay, and in the morning we'll figure out what comes next." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. You're my daughter, your family." That word seemed to break something in Emma, and she began to cry in earnest. Ruth stepped forward, gently pulling the girl into an embrace. "Come inside," Ruth said softly. "You must be exhausted and hungry. Let's get you fed and settled, and there'll be time for talking later." As they walked into the house, Sarah appeared from her room, curious about their visitor. "Who's this, Mama?" Ruth and Jacob exchanged glances. "How did you explain something so complicated to a 6-year-old? "This is Emma," Jacob said carefully. She's my daughter from a long time ago." "Your sister?" Sarah's eyes went wide. "I have another sister. Even bigger than me?" "You do," Emma said. kneeling down to Sarah's level. "And I've been waiting my whole life to meet you. Do you want to see my room? Papa built it special. It has a window and everything. I'd love to see your room." As Sarah dragged Emma off to show her the new addition, Ruth turned to Jacob. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I don't know. I feel like I'm dreaming, like I'm going to wake up and she'll be gone." "She's real. She's here. Your daughter came back to you. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve to get her back after all these years." "Maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's just about love. She loved you enough to spend 2 years searching for you. That's not nothing, Jacob." Over dinner, Emma told them her story. After her mother left Jacob, she'd married the shopkeeper, a man named Daniel Harris. He'd been kind to Emma, raised her as his own, but he died when she was 12. Her mother had worked as a seamstress to support them, but the work was hard, and her health had never been strong. "She told me about you on her deathbed," Emma said. "Said she'd kept you a secret because she was ashamed of what she'd done, how she'd run away instead of helping you heal. But she wanted me to know the truth before she was gone." "What did she tell you about me?" "That you were a good man who'd been broken by war, that you'd loved me completely from the moment I was born, that she'd been too young and too selfish to understand what you needed, and by the time she realized her mistake, it was too late." Jacob was quiet for a long time. "I looked for you both. For years I looked. But it was like you'd vanished from the earth. We went east, Massachusetts. Mother said she wanted to get as far from the war and everything that reminded her of it as possible. Did you have a good life? Were you happy?" "I was loved. Daniel was a good father, even if he wasn't my real father, and Mother did her best. We didn't have much, but we had enough." After dinner, while Ruth put Sarah and baby Emma to bed, Jacob and his long-lost daughter sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. "I have so many questions," Emma said, "about you, about the war, about everything, but I don't know where to start." "Start anywhere. We have time now, all the time in the world." "What was it like, being at Gettysburg?" Jacob had never talked about the war with anyone except Ruth, but looking at Emma, at this young woman who'd come so far to find him, he felt like he owed her the truth. "It was hell," he said simply. 3 days of death and chaos and noise so loud you couldn't think. I saw things no person should ever see, did things I'm not proud of, and when it was over, when we'd won, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt empty." "Is that why you've moved around so much? Why you never settled anywhere?" "I didn't think I deserved to settle. Didn't think I deserved peace when so many good men died and never got to come home." "But you do deserve it. You do deserve to be happy. Ruth taught me that. Her and Sarah. They showed me that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring the dead by living well." Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you love her, Ruth?" "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. She saved my life, Emma. Not in some dramatic way, but in all the small, quiet ways that matter. She saw me at my worst and didn't turn away. She gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. A reason to believe I could be more than just a broken soldier." "I'm glad," Emma said softly. "I'm glad you found someone. Mother always worried that you'd end up alone, that her leaving would destroy you completely. It almost did. But then I opened that barn door and found Ruth and Sarah, and everything changed. Can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you name the baby Emma? Was it for me?" Jacob turned to look at his daughter, his first daughter, and felt tears prick his eyes. "It was. I never forgot you. Never stopped loving you. When Ruth asked what we should name the baby, Emma was the only name that felt right. It was a way to honor you, to keep you with me, even though I thought I'd never see you again." Emma's hand found his, her fingers wrapping around his calloused palm. "I'm here now. You don't have to honor a memory anymore. I'm real, and I'm here, and I want to know you. If you'll let me, I'd like that more than anything." The next morning, Jacob woke early to find Emma already up, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee and watching the sunrise. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, joining her. "Too much to think about. Too many emotions. I know the feeling. I've been thinking about what comes next. I told you I have an aunt in Pennsylvania, but the truth is I barely know her. She's my mother's sister, and they weren't close. What would you want to do if you could do anything?" Emma looked at him, hope and uncertainty warring in her expression. "I'd want to stay here, get to know you and Ruth and my sisters, learn about this life you've built, but I don't want to impose. You have a family now, a real family, and I'm just—" "You're my daughter," Jacob interrupted. "You're not an imposition. You're part of this family, Emma. If you want to stay, there's a place for you here." "What about Ruth?" Have you asked her? I don't need to ask. Ruth has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. She'll welcome you just like she welcomed me. And he was right. When he broached the subject with Ruth later that morning, she didn't hesitate. Of course she should stay. This is her home now, if she wants it. We'll need to build another addition. Then we'll build another addition. We'll make it work, Jacob. We always do. Over the following weeks, Emma settled into life on the homestead. She was a quick learner, picking up the rhythms of farm work and helping wherever she could. She taught Sarah to braid her hair and sang lullabies to baby Emma. She helped Ruth with the cooking and cleaning and listened intently when Jacob talked about caring for the animals and working the land. At night, after the younger girls were asleep, Emma and Jacob would sit together and talk. She told him about her childhood, about the books she loved and the dreams she'd had. He told her about the war, about his years of drifting, about the day he'd found Ruth and Sarah, and his life had changed forever. I wish I could have known you when I was little, Emma said one night. I wish Mother hadn't taken me away. We can't change the past. All we can do is make the most of the time we have now. Do you think you can ever forgive her for what she did? Jacob thought about that. A year ago, even 6 months ago, he would have said no. The anger and hurt had been too deep, but now, looking at the woman his daughter had become, thinking about the wife who loved him and the family he'd found, he realized the anger had faded. I think I already have, he said quietly. Your mother was young and scared, and she made a choice she thought was best. Was it the right choice? No. Did it hurt? More than I can say. But if she hadn't made that choice, I might never have left Missouri. I might never have ended up in that barn. I might never have found Ruth and Sarah, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. Even for me? Emma asked, her voice small. I would never choose between my children. I love you all. Differently maybe because you're all different people, but equally. Always equally. I love you too, Papa. I know I'm 17 and probably too old to call you that, but you're never too old. And I've been waiting 17 years to hear you call me that. By harvest time, Emma had become an essential part of their family. She helped Jacob with the heavy work, and Ruth with the household management. She was patient with Sarah's endless questions and gentle with baby Emma. She fit into their lives as if she'd always been there. One afternoon in September, Jacob was working in the barn when Emma appeared, looking nervous. Papa, can I talk to you about something? Of course. What's on your mind? I've been thinking about my future, about what I want to do with my life. All right. I know I could stay here forever, help you and Ruth with the homestead, and part of me wants that, but there's another part of me that wants more. Is that selfish? It's not selfish to want to make something of yourself. What kind of more are you thinking about? I want to be a teacher. I love learning, and I love helping Sarah with her studies. Dr. Morrison mentioned that the school in town needs another teacher, someone to help with the younger children. I thought maybe I could apply. Jacob felt pride swell in his chest. I think that's a wonderful idea. You'd make an excellent teacher. You don't think I'm abandoning the family? Emma, you're not abandoning anyone. You're growing, building your own life. That's what children are supposed to do. I'm proud of you for knowing what you want and having the courage to pursue it. Would you help me write a letter of recommendation? I'd be honored to. 2 weeks later, Emma was offered the teaching position. The schoolhouse provided a small room for the teacher to live in during the week, but Emma came home every weekend, regaling the family with stories about her students and the things she was teaching them. Watching his daughter thrive, seeing her confidence grow, Jacob felt a sense of completion he'd never expected. He'd spent so many years mourning what he'd lost, never imagining he might get a second chance. One Sunday in late October, the whole family went into town for the harvest festival. Sarah was excited to show off her big sister to all her friends, and Emma was equally excited to introduce Jacob and Ruth to the other teachers. As they walked through the festival, Jacob with baby Emma in his arms, Ruth beside him, Sarah and Emma walking ahead, several townspeople stopped to greet them. "That's quite a family you've assembled there, Reed," said Samuel Watkins. "Yes, sir, it is. 3 daughters, that'll keep you busy." Jacob looked at his girls, at Ruth smiling beside him, and felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. It's the best kind of busy there is. That night, after the girls were all in bed, Jacob and Ruth sat together on the porch, wrapped in a single blanket against the autumn chill. "Can you believe how much has changed in less than 2 years?" Ruth asked. "Sometimes I still think I'm going to wake up and find it was all a dream. If it is, I'm dreaming it too. Jacob pulled her closer, kissing her temple. I never told you this, but the day I found you in that barn, I almost walked away. I stood in that doorway, saw you and Sarah, and my first instinct was to leave, to pretend I'd never seen you. What made you stay? Sarah's eyes, they were the same color as Emma's, my Emma's. I couldn't walk away from those eyes. So in a way, your first daughter led you to your second family. And now she's led me back to herself. It's like everything came full circle. Do you think she's happy? Emma, I think she's happier than she ever expected to be. And so am I. Ruth shifted in his arms, tilting her face up to his. I have something to tell you. Something in her tone made Jacob's heart skip. What is it? I'm pregnant again. Joy and surprise and a touch of fear flooded through him all at once. Are you sure? I'm sure. I've known for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. How do you feel about it? Terrified? Excited? Happy? All of those things at once. How do you feel? Jacob thought about that. Another child, another little life that would depend on him, need him, love him. A year ago, the thought would have sent him running. But now, I feel grateful, he said. Grateful for every blessing, every second chance, every moment of this life we've built together. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The hard parts are what make the good parts worth it. Ruth snuggled deeper into his embrace. I love you, Jacob Reed. I love you too, more than I ever thought I could. Love anyone. As the months passed and Ruth's pregnancy progressed, the family prepared for their newest arrival. Emma helped Jacob build a proper cradle, using techniques he taught her. Sarah insisted on making a blanket, her stitches uneven, but made with love. Ruth sewed tiny clothes and sang lullabies to her swelling belly. In March, on a day when the first crocuses were pushing through the last patches of snow, Ruth went into labor. This time, Jacob was calmer, more confident. He'd been through it once before with Ruth, and he knew what to expect. Dr. Morrison arrived within the hour, and by evening, the sound of a baby's cry filled the house. Congratulations, Mr. Reed, the doctor said, grinning. You have a son, a son. Jacob entered the bedroom slowly, reverently, to find Ruth propped up in bed, exhausted but beaming, a tiny bundle in her arms. Come meet your son, she said softly. Jacob approached, his heart pounding. When Ruth pulled back the blanket, he saw a tiny face with dark hair and eyes that, while still unfocused, seemed to look right at him. He's perfect, Jacob whispered. What should we name him? They'd discussed names for weeks, but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Jacob knew exactly what felt right. Benjamin, after the uncle who brought us together. Ruth smiled. Benjamin Reed. It's perfect. Over the next few weeks, the household adjusted to life with a new baby. Emma was a natural with her little brother, helping Ruth whenever she could. Sarah was fascinated by Benjamin, constantly wanting to hold him and sing to him. Even baby Emma, now a toddler herself, seemed to understand she had a new sibling to help protect. One evening, as Jacob sat in the rocking chair with Benjamin in his arms, all three of his daughters gathered around him. Tell us the story, Papa, Sarah said, about the barn. You've heard it 100 times, but we like it, Emma added. It's our family story. So Jacob told them once more about the cold morning he'd arrived expecting nothing, about the lavender scent and the soft cry that led him to Ruth and Sarah. He told them about the fear and the doubt, about the decision to help that changed everything. And then, what happened? Sarah prompted, even though she knew every word. Then I found a family. Not the one I expected, but the one I needed. Your mother and I built a home together, brick by brick, choice by choice. And when I thought my life couldn't get any better, Emma came back to me. And now we have Benjamin too. It's like a fairy tale, Sarah sighed. Better than a fairy tale, Ruth said, joining them, because it's real. The best things always are, Emma agreed. As Jacob looked around at his family, at the home they'd created together, he felt a peace so profound it brought tears to his eyes. He'd walked into that barn expecting an inheritance of wood and nails. Instead, he'd found love, redemption, and a reason to believe in second chances. The family had left the Cowboy only an abandoned barn as his inheritance, but what he found inside it, and what grew from that chance encounter, changed everything. It gave him back his life, his heart, and eventually even the daughter he thought he'd lost forever. The barn still stood on the property, a reminder of where it all began. Sometimes Jacob would walk out there at sunset, stand in the spot where he'd first seen Ruth and Sarah, and marvel at how far they'd all come, from broken and alone to surrounded by love, from drifting and lost to rooted and found, from a man with nothing to live for to a father, a husband, a pillar of his community. All because he'd opened a door and chosen to help instead of walking away. All because inside that abandoned barn, he'd found not just a sick woman and a frightened child, but his entire future waiting for him. And that, Jacob thought as he watched his family through the window, was the greatest inheritance any man could hope to receive.